to the Bucknuts Morning 5 here on Wednesday, November 15th, 2017. I am Dave Biddle. We have a very special guest today. He is Ben Koo, owner and publisher of one of the best websites out there, Awful Announcing. He is also a proud Ohio State grad and a huge Buckeye fan, of course. Ben, my friend, great to have you on the show. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me on, and you forgot to add to my little intro that I earned my bones on Bucknuts before I did any of that stuff, so it's been a long time.
That is true. Yeah, I wasn't going to shame you by mentioning that you got your start at Bucknuts, but yes, that is true. You did get your start at Bucknuts. Benny Buckeye, as the front row message board savants will know him as. This is long overdue having you on the show. Before we get to Buckeye football, Ben, I do want to talk about Awful Announcing. It is a fantastic site. It is a site that I read, 3 times a day. Just want to ask you, how did you acquire it, and just discuss how you've grown it into a site that, as I said, is like an absolute must-read daily site.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the compliments. We acquired the site in 2010, so Awful Announcing existed before I got involved, and one individual just was really diligent in covering what was going on in sports media, but from the fans' perspective. So he wasn't catering to people within the industry or kind of a business or advertising crowd, which there's a lot of coverage of ESPN and Sports Illustrated and Fox, but it's usually from those perspectives and tailored to people, who work within the industry. And I thought there was a market for content for people who are just kind of fans of sports, but they want to talk about, who's announcing certain games and who's doing studio work and what cameras they're using and, all that types of stuff, when people's contracts are done, when are the rights for the Big Ten coming up. And, that site began to fizzle out because the guy who worked on it was, his full-time job was ramping up, and I liked the idea of the site so much that I made an offer to acquire it in 2010, late 2010, and we've been investing in it ever since, and it's grown and grown and grown, and I think people like the idea of having a site and kind of find out what's going on with everything within the industry.
Yeah, like you said, it was a good idea, and then you guys have taken it to the next stratosphere. You've done a great job growing it. Let's talk about football announcers specifically. I know my favorite part of the site is like when you guys are like sports media critics. So that's great. Like when you guys go in on Clay Travis or Mike Greenberg, whoever it might be, you guys do a great job with that. But I do want, and I also love your 30 for 30 reviews. Ben Koo is an absolute expert on 30 for 30 for those who don't know. So if you have any questions about 30 for 30 for ESPN, Ben Koo is the man to talk to. But I want to talk about football announcers. We'll get to the good and the bad. Let's start with the guys that get the most criticism, whether they're college football or pro football. I want to hear the football announcers that you guys hear the most criticism about.
Ooh, most criticism. Well, it's interesting that you bring that up because when you have your NFL Sundays, there's only a handful of booths that are nationwide. So there can be, and I know, out in Ohio, where I'm headed in about a month, moving-wise, I would imagine that the Browns games and when the Bengals are bad potentially get, bad announcers because that's not a national game. But it probably floats under the radar given, it's only broadcast in certain areas. So the king used to be Phil Simms, who was replaced by Tony Romo, but that Simms used to just drive our fans nuts. Nowadays, Joe Buck still rankles a lot of people. Romo's been a bit of an acquired taste. Some people still don't like Chris Fowler, and a lot of people kind of don't like what's his name, Tom Brennan from Fox.
Yeah, Tom Brenneman.
Tom Brenneman, there you go. And Dick Stockton, a lot of people think he's kind of over, his prime. I think people have been saying that for a while. So I would say from a football boost standpoint, that's kind of the feedback there. If you look at college football right now, if you look at the announcers ESPN had a few years ago, Sean McDonough moved on, is doing Monday Night Football. Brett Musburger retired. They lost Brad Nessler to CBS. And, so there's a lot of people that ESPN has lost, and I feel like, not a lot of guys have kind of stepped up. They have Steve Levy, in there. I know we get a lot of complaints about Brian Grease, which I know this audience will like that a Michigan fan doesn't go over too well. So it's kind of got a little bit in terms of quality-wise, if you like Musburger and McDonough. ESPN also lost Chris Spielman to Fox. I think specifically ESPN's, announcing depth, I would say, has definitely gone downhill, unfortunately.
And let's get to the good. Let's get to the guys who are the guys you get the most compliments about, and the guys that you yourselves review the best, college and pro. Let's go to both of them. Just go through some of the guys that you think are some of the best college and pro football announcers.
I think one guy that gets a lot of compliments and doesn't really, it's very subjective, and we'll have, 80 people tweet this guy's great, but then we'll also get, 40 tweets that he's bad. One guy who seems to really kind of go over favorably, I would say, is Joe Tessitore. I think people like Tessitore, and if you follow him a little bit, there's the so-called Tess effect, the Tessitore effect, where he seems to call big games. I think Nessler at CBS, I think that was a great way to replace Vern. I think that's been a good move. From a color guy, I know nationally, Herb Street goes over pretty well. I know he's pretty divisive to Ohio State fans. Some people think he's great, and some people kind of look back to the end of the Tressel era and his move from Ohio and consider him kind of person non grata to Buckeye Nation. But Herb Street's someone who goes over well. Gary Danielson's, I think, an acquired taste. I think on the NFL level, people are pretty fond of Chris Collinsworth and Al Michaels. I personally think Tirico's pretty good, and I think Al Michaels may potentially retire after this year, and we might see Mike Tirico do the Sunday night games with Chris Collinsworth. Romo's been pretty favorable. Aikman's pretty well liked. So I think when you look at the NFL, if you're one of those national games, so Sunday night football, Thursday night football, Aikman and Buck and Romo and Nance, those booths are typically well liked. And then if you're getting one of the regional broadcasts, a lot of people are not fans of what they're kind of dealt with there.
Yeah, I really like Tessitore. You brought him up. Tessitore, I think he's a gem. On the pro side, I really like Kevin Burkhardt. He's a underrated guy. I know he does baseball a lot too, but I think Kevin Burkhardt does a great job. No matter what he's doing, I think Kevin Burkhardt does a great job. Curious to get your take on Gus Johnson and Joel Klatt. Buckeye Nation, they've fallen in love with these guys, Benny. I mean, Gus is like a Michigan guy, but with the Cardale Jones, and this year with the, you told me, there was barbecue, you didn't invite me, it's just, and then Joel Klatt, people are falling in love with those guys. Just your thoughts on Gus Johnson and Joel Klatt?
I love Gus Johnson. When there's a big play, you want Gus Johnson doing that play. If there's a close game, he's great. But, in some of these games that are blowouts, he doesn't have those moments for big calls. And so that's where he struggles. I like Joel Klatt a lot. I think he's done really well, and I think they were wise to move Charles Davis off of the lead booth with Gus Johnson. I do think there's a little bit of a chemistry issue with them. I don't want to say they're bad together, but there may be like two ingredients that don't potentially mix as well as other broadcast booths. I think you'll somewhat notice it if you're flipping back between Herb Street and Fowler, if they're doing a game at the same time as Gus Johnson and Joel Klatt. But I think they're probably a top 3 college football booth. I would put them behind Herb Street and Fowler, behind Tessitore, and then probably rank them as third. But when they get a game that kind of gets away from them, you can kind of they're struggling to kind of fill the airtime. Where previously, you have Fowler and Herb Street who have that rapport from game day. Musburger and Herb Street always kind of were able to broaden what they would talk about in games that weren't competitive. So I would say it's kind of an area where they're a little lacking. I think if you get a great game and it's back and forth and there's big plays, you're going to have a lot of fun watching Gus Johnson.
Okay, we've talked enough about your day job. I just love this shit, but excuse my French. But I love talking about that. Let's talk about your true love, which is the Ohio State Buckeyes. The rankings came out last night. They're 9th in the college football playoff rankings. I don't think it would have mattered if they're 8th or 9th. I thought they were out of it after the Iowa game. I came out there, and I didn't think this was emotional. I really felt this way. I feel like I just analyzed it. I thought they were out of it, Benny, after they lost to Iowa, just because of the way they lost. They were lost to Iowa by 7. I said, okay, maybe they can make it as a 2-loss team. But now it looks like if they win out, if the Buckeyes win out, which won't be easy, and Bama, Miami, and Oklahoma all win out, it looks like the Buckeyes are going to sneak in there as the number 4 team. Do you think that will happen? If the Buckeyes win out, Bama wins out, Miami wins out, Oklahoma wins out, do you think the Buckeyes will make the college football playoff?
I do, actually. I think I was in the same boat with you and a lot of Buckeye fans where we didn't want to hear this false hope of we can make the playoff. It's like you don't want to be intoxicated by this idea of making the playoff and reliving 2014 when you kind of thought we were out and then at the very end we stuck in. And I didn't really pay any attention to it. I didn't even want to waste a second of thought on it. And then, Washington goes down Friday night, and then Georgia just gets lit up, and then Notre Dame, and it's like the door went from barely cracked to, maybe half open now. And now you can probably count the things that you need to happen for Ohio State to make the playoff on one hand, and they're not that crazy at all. I think there's probably, outside of, what you presented of Alabama and Miami winning out, I think that there's other potential ways for Ohio State to get in. There's still big games to be played, and, you still have potentially Georgia and Auburn playing Alabama. So, there's 2 teams that are going to fall out there. Notre Dame is going to get leaked by Ohio State if Ohio State wins out. We're going to be knocking on the doorstep if you presumably think we beat Illinois, but, by the time the Michigan game happens, if we can beat Michigan, that week we'll probably be 4, not 4, but maybe 5 or 5th or 6th, and not needing much to happen to get into that 4. So, let's just keep winning. Urban Meyer is kind of the same mentality that I think me and a lot of fans are, and yourself. It's like, let's not get too ahead of ourselves, but I think everything that you dream of playing for is still out there. Right before we got on the phone, I looked at a couple bowl predictions. Brett McMurphy, formerly of ESPN, he has Ohio State playing Auburn in the national championship game, and I think if you would say that a week ago, you would tell him he's nuts. But right now it doesn't look too crazy.
Sign me up for that. Buckeyes and War Eagle. Let's do that. Let's do that. I like that from Brett McMurphy.
How about a Miami rematch? Wouldn't that be fun? Another Miami national championship rematch?
Yeah, name the team. I'm in. But yeah, that would be great. Alabama. I want another shot at Clemson. I think that would be my preference. Is maybe you're crazy as a Buckeye to want to play Clemson, because here's what happens when the Buckeyes play Clemson in bowl games. Woody punches a player, never coaches again, gets fired. Braxton gets his shoulder shredded by Vic Beasley. They get beat by 31 last year. So I realize that bad things happen, but eventually that's going to change, my friend. Eventually the Buckeyes are going to get the best of Clemson. So I want a piece of Clemson this year, but I don't think that's going to happen.
Well, I'm a little scared of Clemson for the reasons you brought up. And last year, I actually went to that game. I thought I could, get a couple buddies to come with. Nobody came with, and I said, screw it, I'm going anyways. And then I realized that tickets were cheaper on the Clemson sideline. So I went to that game and was, in the Clemson section, and I stayed pretty much the whole game. So I don't know if I have it in me to go to another game against Clemson, and if I do, though, I'm going to spend the extra money to sit in the Ohio State section. But yeah, another shot at Clemson. Redemption would be great. I think we're seeing how good Deshaun Watson is, so maybe with him gone and a few other guys gone, I would imagine that would probably be the team they would get the most up for. They'd be most motivated. That wound is fresh. The majority of that team of the team this year probably has that still fresh in their mind, And so I think a lot of people would assume, going up against Bama would maybe get the best foot forward from Ohio State and, the best effort. But I would imagine Clemson would probably bring out our best football. So maybe that works in terms of if we're going to think through, the most positive scenario of getting all the way to a championship game.
Yeah, looking at that game from last year, it should not impact what happens this year. It absolutely should not. But the committee is made up of human beings, and Ohio State's not just a two-loss team. If they're able to run the table, they're a two-loss team that lost by 31 at Iowa. They got handled by Oklahoma, even though the final score didn't look that bad. I mean, Ohio State had to kick a late field goal to make it look somewhat respectable. And I've debated this internally, Ben, and I really don't know the answer. Could the 31-0 against Clemson last year in the playoffs, if there's a question mark with Ohio State and another team, I don't know how it might work out, but there's, it could be like a tiebreaker of some sort. Could that work against them, what happened last year?
I think, maybe a little bit, but I think, if it was a team, I think one thing that probably is in the back of the head of the committee as well as their television partner ESPN is they know Ohio State moves the needle ratings-wise. And so if it was a team like a Boise State or maybe even like a Wisconsin or a TCU or just kind of a team that doesn't have who isn't on national TV a lot, doesn't put up big ratings, game in, game out, I think they could potentially point to 31-0 from a year, a result from the year before and go, we're going to kind of stay away from that. But I think the fact that they know that they got to sell seats, they got to put up big numbers, college football is a business as much as the NCAA tries to pretend it's not. I think Ohio State typically gets a little bit of a benefit of the doubt. I would think, maybe it evens out with 31-0 being in kind of, in the back of people's heads. But I still think that you want to have those big programs. And same for college basketball. Duke and Kentucky and Kansas, get favorable, matchups and seedings in the NCAA tournament, and they get favorable tip times. So I think blue bloods are always getting just the slightest of an edge when it comes to, committee decisions. And I would think that would probably be a bigger factor than the fact that we got whooped on last year, unfortunately.
Very well said. Before I let you go, where are you at on JT Barrett? Are you a guy that's like, I can't believe he gets so much criticism. Yeah, he's not perfect, but can't believe he gets so much flack. Are you kind of like, I'm a little conflicted here. Yeah, he shows signs here and there, but then you kind of wonder. Just curious where you're at on JT Barrett as he gets ready to play his final game in the Horseshoe here in a couple of days.
Yeah, I think he's been inconsistent, and I think it's, I don't think he should be benched, and I don't think Dwayne Haskins is better than JT Barrett. And I think the fact that we're still in a playoff discussion and people want to make a QB switch at times is crazy. He's the best QB on the team, and he doesn't always play good, but I think people are just kind of vindictive and want to move to the next shiny thing. But we're not at that time yet, and this really isn't kind of the season to get rid of JT. He did play pretty terribly in a few games, and that's been unfortunate, but I don't think we've really had, Dwayne Haskins. I think after experiencing Cardale Jones, there are fans who just think we're going to switch to Dwayne Haskins or maybe potentially Joe Burrow, and it's just going to be Cardale Jones over again. But that lightning in a bottle is almost like totally non-existent, other than that Cardale Jones Cinderella story, which was amazing. So I think, my opinion is he's played inconsistent, and he can play a lot better and more consistently. And I think a lot of it traces back to the fact that we've rotated different offensive coordinators in and out throughout his career. But, here's a guy who can go 4-0 against Michigan, who could take us to 3 playoffs in his 4 years as a starter, with the 1 year we were not potentially in, the 1 year we were not in, being a one-loss team or, was an unfortunate being left out, which might have been better than the national championship team. I think you just got to ride with him and be happy for what you get and just hope that, he plays a big game. I think at the end of the day, you don't know what you're going to get from him. But, I mean, even more so, we don't have Cardell Jones. We have a couple guys who are young and unproven and have looked great in limited time, but they're not better than JT Barrett. And I think if you really know your football, I think it's hard to come to the conclusion that we should make a QB change. So regardless how much you hate JT or love JT, he's the best guy for the job. So let's roll with it.
Great stuff. Ben Koo, owner and publisher of Awful Announcing and The Comeback. This was a lot of fun, my friend. Thank you so much, Ben.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me on. Love what you guys do.
And thanks to all the listeners out there for tuning in to the show. I appreciate it. Hope you have a great day. Let's hear that Buckeye swag, best damn band in the land.